I'm absolutely raging with the world at the moment. We live in a society where we can't walk home safely at night without looking over our shoulder and putting our keys in our finger to make sure we're protected. And actually, once we're then in our homes, we're still not safe, are we? We can't go on a night out, or even out during the day, without taking measures to protect ourselves and our friends to make sure we're not under attack. Women are picked up off the streets by cops, murdered and raped, and then this abuse is covered up and justified by the institutions that are supposed to protect us. And then, as if it wasn't bad enough, we're blamed, aren't we? We're told it was our fault, we're told we're stupid, we're told we should have done more to protect ourselves. And we don't get any justice, and then we're lucky if there's anything, any provisions in society to actually help us get through what we've been through. We see women like Nicola Bulley absolutely humiliated. The reason she fell into that river supposedly was because she was menopausal. It's absolutely outrageous, this narrative that's pushed. And it doesn't end, does it? From the second we're born, we're foisted into pink or blue. We're either going to be a princess or a footballer, and we can't get out of those strict roles. Babies are held differently, depending on the gender that they're assumed at birth. We see school children aged 10 told they can't wear knee-high socks because it's going to distract their male teachers. And this is all propped up by our rulers in society and the media that supports them. We live with the pressures to look beautiful, to have sex, but not too much sex. Have a partner, settle down, raise those children and not look past it. And then we die. It's absolutely exhausting. But I don't think we can just leave it there, can we? We can't just say, there's all these horrible things and we get angry about it and there's nothing to do. Because actually as I'm sure the rest of you are in agreement here today, we want to fight back, we want to do something about this. So we need to understand why we're in this position, why these things happen to us, and work out a strategy for change. Now, the first thing I want to say today is that women's oppression hasn't always existed. In fact, it's probably only existed for about 10% of humanity. And that means we can fight for a world without it. It doesn't have to be a utopian dream to live without sexism, because we've lived without it before. And as Marxists, we argue that oppression is rooted in the class system that we live in. And that can only be overthrown by working class people. So a strategy that just focuses on a gendered fight isn't enough to actually win liberation. So why is it that Marxism can explain the oppression that we live with and provide a solution? Because there's an assumption, isn't there, that Marx was just this olden days guy with a big beard, sat in the British Library, concerned about economics. Well, that's not true. Marx gave us a toolkit to be able to fight back against a system where the minority of people, the 1%, own everything and control the people who have to work for a living. And Marx also gave us an understanding of why the path to liberation lies in a total transformation of society. We can't just tamper with the system that we live under. We have to fight for a revolution from below to change society as a whole. So sexism comes from the system that we live in, and I think that can seem quite abstract, can't it? Because women face oppression at the hands of men. The person that attacks you or the person you're scared of on the tube at night is a man. It's not the system. But I want to argue actually that sexism isn't natural and it's not biological. And I actually don't think that the majority of men have an interest in maintaining women's oppression. Actually, I think that it's working class unity, men and women coming together, that is the best chance to win our liberation. Now, the main institution that has shaped and controlled our role in society and our sexuality is the family unit. And in class society, the family is how the next generation is reared, it is where we are socialised, and it is shaped by how production is organised. And it has two material functions. The first one is an ideological one, and the second one is an economic one, and this is something that I'm going to come back to a bit later. But Friedrich Engels, who was Marx's partner in action, wrote in The Origins of Family, Private Property and the State about how women, throughout 90% of history, actually played a key role as producers and decision makers in the small hunter-gatherer societies that existed. But then about 10,000 years ago, the way humans organised in society changed. People began to settle on land. And this is where we see class divisions first occur, when humans began settling on land and producing more than they needed to survive, and this was called a surplus. Some people developed into the people who controlled the surplus, and some people were the ones who created the surplus. So we see classes emerging. And you could say, well, that's all well and good, that's very interesting, but what has that got to do with sexism in 2023? Well, the growth of this surplus and the rise of classes came with a division of labour that shaped the position of women in society. For the first time, biological differences between men and women took on an importance that they hadn't before. women were primarily concerned in these societies with giving birth, and it sort of made sense to them. You know, production was created around settled agriculture, so the more children you had meant the more children you had to work the land, and the more stuff could be produced. And it also became important for men to be able to trace their lineage so they could pass property on. It meant women, you know, were pushed out of decision-making roles in society because they had now a different function in society. But I don't think that meant that all men were suddenly, you know, having a great time at the expense of women. Actually, men were also exploited and oppressed, whether it was servants or slaves or peasants. We see classes beginning to emerge and shaping people's experiences. Now, the family has changed every time society has changed. And it can feel like our lives have got absolutely nothing in common with these societies 10,000 years ago that we read about in history books. Because we do have more equality today. We do live slightly differently. You know, we don't live in, you know, on farms and stuff. We live in houses. But we do still live in an unequal society that is split into classes. Now, I have gone through quite a lot of history here, you know, a good sort of 10,000 years of human history, and I am going to skip again to slightly more recent times with the rise of capitalism, but I think this is a really important shift to talk about. Because around 200 years ago, capitalism developed. The home, the family unit went from being the centre of production to work being taken outside that family unit. People were forced from the farms and villages that they lived in into the big cities and factories, you know, across the country. Men and women and children were thrust, weren't they, into 70-hour working weeks and these awful conditions. And, you know, the average age of someone in Manchester was about 15 years old. Women were literally giving birth on the factory floors. And this family unit was at complete risk of falling apart. And the new capitalist class, you know, the bosses who owned the factories and the things in the factories and so on, they saw how this was going to undermine their ability to make profits. Because if everyone's dying really young, how can you exploit people if there's not a fit and healthy layer of people, you know, being bred? So the family unit was rebuilt by people at the top of society. And the ruling class pushed these social and moral norms onto the family unit, focusing on the sanctity of marriage, raising the children, so that a new generation would be reproduced, socialised and taken care of for free. So the idea was the man would work full-time while the woman took charge of the family, the home and the child rearing. And this was mirrored on how the ruling classes lived in their family units. You know, and it was attractive for women as well. They didn't want to be giving birth on the factory floors or, you know, facing miscarriages and so on. And although the reality for working class women meant they still had to work to make ends meet, the idea was that women would take on the burden of the family unit. So the family and women's oppression is rooted in class society, but it takes this particular form under capitalism. And it's still very much with us when we look around. I don't think any women get married and think, great, now I get to, you know, do all the washing up and look after the children. But women are still expected to do that in society, aren't they? They still work outside the home and take care of the labour inside it. And this has a benefit for the ruling classes in today's society. Worldwide, trillions of dollars and pounds and every other currency is saved annually by the ruling classes. You think about the burdens the family takes on, the cleaning, the washing, the socialising, the taking care, that's all done for free in the family unit. That's why 85% of austerity the Tories cut were borne by women, because when the nurseries shut, when the care homes shut, it all goes back on women in the family. You know, we saw the same with the pandemic. Women's rights were rolled back some 50 years because women had to go back home, try and work, and also look after the kids when the schools were shut. You know, the Tories did that awful advert, didn't they? The stay-at-home one, and each little box was a woman doing a different chore. Like that is their idea of women in society. And every day, women undertake 12.5 billion hours of unpaid care work a day. 12.5 billion hours. Imagine all the stuff we could be getting up to if we didn't have this, all these hours of caring to do. And the family still has an ideological role in how women are seen as well. And that, again, may seem a bit abstract to say. You know, the reason you're being catcalled or the reason that you face domestic abuse is because of the family unit. But actually, the ideological role the family plays, you know, that a woman's fundamental role in society is to give birth and raise the children, is at the heart of the problems that we're going to be discussing today throughout the event. And it does provide an explanation for why women are catcalled or spiked or harassed or victim blamed. Because the idea of a woman is that they're passive, that they're gentle, they're caring, they're emotional, they're available, they're willing to please. You know, woe betide, she's aggressive and speaks out for herself. This flows from the family unit and the roles that we have within it. But that also has an effect for men as well, doesn't it? Men are told they're told not to cry, they're told to man up, they're told to grow a pair. All these negative connotations that come with our roles in the family unit. If men look after their own children, they're heroes somehow. All these different standards apply to men and women. But they're not natural. We're not born with these ideas in our head. It's reproduced everywhere in society, whether it's in adverts, it's in porn, it's in TV, and we see our politicians defend it all the time when they're in crisis. And it's propped up as well, isn't it, by legal and financial advantages to be in these family units. Women in society are completely objectified and treated as public property. Our bodies are used to sell things, they're things to be sold, and we're sexualised with these things just to please. And there was new stats yesterday as well, just yesterday in time for this meeting, that shows that women have shorter careers, they do more part-time work, they earn less than men. That's not because men are lazy or have something about them that makes them work harder. There's the gender pay gap in society comes from this double burden of women having to work and go out, go back home and look after the children and their husbands and so on. Is it any wonder though when paternity pay is just 2 weeks? Paid paternity pay is just 2 weeks. It's structured into society that the man goes out to be the breadwinner and the woman stays at home to be this expert caregiver. I mean, it's important to note here as well, though, isn't it, that the family can and is a source of comfort for people, a source of love and support and comfort. We love our parents and our grandparents and sometimes our siblings. But is it any wonder that they can also be a pressure cooker when all the burdens of capitalism are, back in this atomised private unit? It's why we see 60% of women murdered by a partner or an ex-partner. All the pressures of family life in this one little unit that we're told to stay in forever. So, what is it we want? And how do we get it? Well, we want liberation, and that means an end to oppression, and not just sexism, but racism, homophobia, transphobia, and so on. That means we want a different society that isn't brimming with division. And as revolutionary socialists, we say it as the working class men and women, that are the best possible force for fighting for this change. Now, it's important to note as well that sexism does affect all women in society, but not all women experience oppression in the same way. What shapes us most fundamentally is class. And class isn't just, one list of, discrimination. It's not defined by an income or what you drink or, what shop that you go to. Class is a social relationship. And Marx described how capitalism, by pulling the working class together in large numbers, has actually created its own gravedigger. That's why we support strikes and see people pulling back their labour power as the best force for change. But capitalism also divides us through oppression. Now, like I said, that doesn't mean that ruling class women don't face sexism. Of course they do. But they don't have the same interest in society as we do in challenging the system. They sit at the top of that system that oppresses us. You think about Suella Braverman. She's a black woman. She's going to face oppression in her day-to-day life. But Suella Braverman's the woman that wants to stop women and children and men from coming to Britain seeking safety. She's the one that sits at the top of the institutionally sexist Met Police. Meghan Markle, another great example of someone who faces sexism and racism from horrible bigots like Piers Morgan. But it is hard to ignore that she can afford protection and a cook and a cleaner and a makeup artist and a personal styler and a childminder to do all the things that working class women have to do themselves, and the people that are doing those things for her are also working class women. You think about all the rights that we have now, abortion rights, voting rights, all the things that have been won through struggle from below, not because someone at the top decided they were going to give us a good time. These things were, fought for. That's why we have to fight in the here and now, isn't it? It's why we have to fight for abortion rights to protect them. We have to fight for trans rights. We have to protect the rights that we've got. We gain confidence when we fight in these struggles. We learn the lessons of the bigger battles that are yet to come. But we also can't ignore how these rights and these movements can be co-opted and rolled back. I think the session on abortion is going to be great for talking about this later. That's why we want, our male revolutionaries, our male comrades fighting alongside us. They're actually not the enemy in society. And the movements that women have led, they have had to fight quite hard to argue for that unity, to say that these issues are class issues, not just women's issues. And that's not always been easy. But there is a rich history of working class people coming together to defend women's rights and winning, and this is where we're at our strongest. A great example of this is in 1979, to defend abortion rights. Working class men and women took to the streets, about 80,000 people, in a demonstration organised by trade unions to defend abortion rights. Like I said, it's not. These fights weren't always easy, but when they're seen as a class issue is when we have the most gains. So, how do we get there then? How do we get to this liberation? How do we get working class people fighting together and get to this type of society that I've been describing? Well, we're here today, aren't we, in the radical tradition of International Women's Day, and I think I want to talk quickly about this. International Women's Day was proposed in 1910 at the International Socialist Women's Conference that the 8th of March should be honoured as a day annually to remember women in struggle, especially those in New York who were fighting back from below. It was actually marked as International Working Women's Day. And when it was adopted by the feminist movement in 1967 and then by the UN in 1975, the working bit was dropped. And now it's kind of a day that we get 2-for-1 pizza deals and spa days. So I think it's actually important that we remember the radical tradition of International Women's Day when we think about how we fight back, and also think about how our movements can be co-opted just to make profit. It's no easy task uprooting the oldest form of oppression, which is sexism. And although it's united fighting that can change this, ideas, do change in struggle, but they don't change overnight. What we do know, though, is that when we do fight back, ideas can and will change, and often it's women leading in those strikes and those fight backs globally. We look at Iran at the moment. That was sparked, wasn't it, by women fighting back against repressive laws that has sparked an upsurge of millions of workers striking and protesting. We saw the same in Sudan with women at the heart of a movement, or Egypt's revolution in 2011 that was sparked by women textile workers. Or we look at women who fought to defend abortion rights in Poland or in the US, or women that took a lead in the global Black Lives Matter movement, or women on strike in Britain here today who are fighting back against pay cuts and the gender pay gap and the Tories' awful cuts and attacks on working class people. And we know that when life is tough, sexist ideas take a harder grip in society. It's easy to blame the woman that's next to you rather than the people at the top of society. But when we fight back, it offers an opportunity for change. And right now, we're seeing strikes that some of us have never seen before in our lifetime. And it's on these picket lines, during these strikes, that workers take a look around them and think, oh, hang on a minute, the real problem is the boss, isn't it? It's the Tories. It's not the trans person or the refugee. It's the people that are making my life a misery in the here and now. A couple of weeks back, on the 1st of February, 500,000 people walked out on strike, and on the 15th of March, it looks to be even bigger than that. And the majority of these people are teachers, young women, lots of them Muslim, lots of them black, and this is absolutely fantastic and a movement that we have to be part of. We have an opportunity to make these strikes, these struggles, as radical and successful as possible. So we need to be on the picket lines and on these demonstrations arguing for working class unity. Because separating the issue of women's oppression from the wider struggles that challenge the system actually weakens our ability to win. We need social upheaval, we need a revolution to rip apart women's oppression, and we need to replace it with a system that puts workers at the centre of it. So revolutionary socialists, like us in the Socialist Workers' Party, want every single strike to reach its maximum potential for this reason. And we're not only interested in fighting oppression when it arises within the workplace, we also want to fight it everywhere, and we have to fight for workers to fight for it outside the workplace as well. And it has to be at the heart of every single struggle over pay and conditions. We have to fight against every form of oppression too, not just sexism, but racism, transphobia, and the others that I've mentioned, whenever and wherever we see it, and link these things together under the banner of class. Because some of the biggest shifts we've seen for women's rights have come when strikes have exploded into revolutionary upsurges. Take the 1917 Russian Revolution, for example. Now you might think, well, that was a long time ago, what's that got to do with today? But it's the only time that working class people have taken part in a successful revolution and grabbed control of the state. Brilliant, thank you. And it started in February, when women workers walked out and called for their male comrades to come out and join them. And after the revolution in October, the question of women's liberation was absolutely central. It wasn't like a nice sort of thing that happened afterwards. It was crucial to the revolution. The Bolsheviks set up communal kitchens, communal nurseries, communal laundrettes, and so on. And this meant that women were freed from the economic chains of the home and the family and could participate equally in society. This family unit was ripped apart. What did this lead to? It led to abortion on demand, divorce on demand, homosexuality being decriminalised, because this family unit was no longer the centre of production in society. They were completely dismantled. It's why, the leading Russian revolutionary Lenin said that revolutions are festivals of the oppressed and the exploited. It's not just a happy coincidence that women were liberated because of a working class revolution. Now, obviously, it can feel like we're quite far from a revolution still today. And actually standing on the picket lines together doesn't suddenly mean that people's ideas automatically change. It takes socialists like us to push for the argument that the fight for pay conditions should be linked with the fight against women's oppression. But we know that when we fight together is when things change. That's why every single worker's struggle matters for the impact it has on other workers' struggles. We don't just want equal rights in an unequal society. It's why the fight for socialism and the fight for women's liberation is the same fight. You can't have one without the other. So after this International Women's Day event, I think we need to take the theory that we're going to be talking about today and take it into practice. We have to go out and win this new world that we know is possible. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.